Armed with all of this knowledge about why we shoot, what makes a good photo, how to shoot it, another thing that can really help is having great locations to shoot. If you're an outdoor photographer, oftentimes the location can be thought of as the upper ceiling to what your shot can eventually be like. If you've got your skills on lock, if you've bought all the correct gear, if you know what you're doing, then the only other real variable is the location itself. Meaning how you get there, assessing what the light is like when you do get there, and then preparing for the shot to the best of your abilities. Think of it like this. In photography, you want as many things as possible in the process to stack up and eventually add to your overall photo. If you've got a specific affinity for a particular light, at a certain time of day perhaps, then you go to a location that's interesting and it has the types of compositions that you typically like to shoot. And then if you bring all the right gear and allow yourself to then shoot it properly, so long as you've prepared mentally and have practiced your skills to bring out the most out of that situation, then look, all the odds are stacked on your side and it's very likely you'll end up with a very great shot. So you want as many things to go right for you as possible with photography, and having a great location to shoot at, in, or of is a huge factor to that. So we want to be able to research, find, and plan locations to execute a successful shoot. So let's break that down. The first thing is actually finding new places to take photos of. Whether you are trying to find some nice sightseeing locations on a trip to a new city, or you're doing a road trip to new locations in your own country. Whatever the case, the research techniques are usually the same. The first thing I do is try to cast a wide a net as possible to get as many results as possible and then narrow down from there. In Google, I'll search best sightseeing spots for X country or X city, or Instagram worthy locations in X, or X city best photography locations, or best photography from X, or something along those lines. I'll also do this very broad search on YouTube as well, because chances are that the place you're going to has had many people go to that location and take photos there before. So there might be, or probably will be, a lot of content that will list off a bunch of different locations and potential places that you can go. Plus, YouTube is the second largest search engine anyway, so you might as well. From there, I'll also jump onto Instagram and I'll also search for that location or city that I'm going to. And I'll try to look up local photographers taking photos within that city. And I will also DM local photographers in those cities and try to ask them for locations that they think are nice to visit and look at. Or I might even ask specific photographers to show me around in the hopes that one day, when they come to my country, I'll do the same thing for them as well. Now, you could repeat the process with whatever kind of platform you're comfortable with. Flickr, Pinterest, wherever. Use all of them if you want to cast a really wide net. Those are just the ones that work for me. Again, the objective here is to obtain as many locations as possible. The more, the merrier. And after all of that, I'll have quite the list of locations I could potentially go to and see for myself. And I'll then go and take a quick mental note of which ones are the most important or appealing to me, and then I will prioritize them. From there, I'll take all of the locations in that prioritized list, and regardless of whether I have the image of them or links or names or whatever, I will individually search every single one and research how to get there and assess whether or not it's feasible to get there within the duration of the trip from a logistics perspective. And there are a lot of considerations to make here, but some of the things that I usually try to consider are things like, how do I actually get there? If I'm staying at a particular location, how many buses, trains, or planes do I need to take in order to get there? Do I need to do a hike? And is the hike hard? Is it multi-day? Is it dangerous? All of these considerations in terms of distance and actually getting there are a huge factor in whether or not they're even worth going to in the first place. For me, there have been so many occasions where I've had to bail on specific locations I've really wanted to go to because it was just too far out of the way from the rest of my trip and, not really worth it for the time or the money it would have cost to get there and etc. But it's better to find out now at the planning stage rather than when you're on the ground on the road trip itself. Another thing is, can I even access the location when I am planning to go? And I mean in terms of legal access or weather or danger. There are some locations that just aren't accessible at certain times of the year due to things like the weather being too hot, or maybe there's too much snow, or perhaps the tides aren't right and land isn't accessible. You wouldn't want to try to hike up a mountain only to find that there's too much snow and you're severely underdressed and underprepared, or if the track was closed for that time of year, for example. Is the light going to be what I want? The sun moves in location across the sky at different times of the year, across different seasons, and the shot that you see from a location may or may not have to be shot at a very specific time of year for the sun to line up exactly in the spot that you're aiming to go for example. And you can use an app like Photopills to determine exactly where the sun will be rising from and setting at the exact date and time that you are looking for. Of course, if sun placement isn't that big of a deal, then that's okay as well. Can I actually find exactly where this place is? Because sometimes there just isn't any information about it on the internet. Sometimes the location is a relatively unknown one in some obscure location that you've never seen before, but you've seen a photo of. And in that case, it's best to ask the actual person who took that image. And, if that fails, then go to Google Earth or Google Maps to find the exact location yourself and then reverse engineer how to get there manually. Honestly, the latter has happened to me so often in Japan. So often I see there are locations that, I might scout from a photo on Instagram or something like that. And usually most photographers are Japanese in that situation. And, the locations are in Japanese too. So no one documents them. So you can't research them. So I've had to turn to Google Earth so often and waste hours upon hours scouring the maps to see if I can even find a spot. Okay, so if all of those things check out, then I can add them to the list of vetted locations to go on a given trip. Depending on the complexity of the trip and how you tend to organize things, this can go a myriad of ways. But in general, some things to consider are getting there early, making sure that you give yourself at least half an hour before the optimal light time so that you can scout around and try and find the best composition for your shot. There's nothing worse than having done all of the prep only to then be unprepared for your composition and fail at the very last second. If you're going to go to all the trouble of doing all the research, then you might as well get there earlier than expected and then have to wait for the perfect opportunity rather than rushing, or even worse, not getting the composition that you were looking for in the first place. Knowing what light you want. When you're thinking of going to a location, think about what kind of light you want for your composition and make sure you're there for that time. Some compositions work really well in the blue hour with a nice blue cast over everything. Some compositions work really nicely when there's golden light during golden hour, and others work really well during harsh light when there's hard shadows between buildings and so on. Again, using an app like Photopills will not only tell you the direction of where the light will be coming from at a certain time, but it will also tell you the time of light as well so that you can then plan ahead. For me, I absolutely love shooting in blue hour. It's, for me, my favorite time of day, specifically sunset blue hour. And for that, I always have to look the timing up. Other people. Depending on this shot, if a location is a popular one, like a tourist location, then there may or may not be other people there taking the same shot. But there may or may not be people there in the shot that you want to take as well, depending on the scenario that you have. Decide whether or not this is going to be a big deal in your composition or not, and then adjust your shoot time accordingly. Sunrise shoots will always be the least crowded because not as many people can be bothered to wake up early. And sunset shoots will always be the most busy photographer-wise, and midday and during lunch will be the most busy in terms of general people. Backup locations. What happens if you get there, but it wasn't what you were looking for or expecting? What if you get lost? What if you get there, but Mother Nature just didn't want to play nice that morning? Well, make sure you have a backup location or a backup shoot. If you're investing a lot of time to get to a single place, in many cases, you may as well have backup locations to visit next, especially if you're traveling a long distance. You did travel all that way after all. And depending on the importance of the shot, if you get there and the light wasn't right, then plan a trip so that you have the opportunity to revisit the same location within the same trip, perhaps for, sunrise the next day or something like that. For example, in Japan, Mount Fuji is a mountain that everyone wants to see, but little do most tourists know, sometimes, actually quite often, Mount Fuji can be covered in clouds, making it so that you can't see anything. And some people have a strike rate of less than 20% for the number of successful sightings of Mount Fuji. For me, in the dozens of times that I've been able to successfully see the Great Mountain, I've only not been able to see it twice because of the weather. And on those times that I didn't see it, I saw it the next day. I always plan ahead when it comes to that temperamental but gorgeous mountain. Cost. If you're absolutely set on a particular location, then how much will getting there cost? If it's a single trip, it's probably going to be more expensive per location over time because you're just going back and forth than it would be if you were doing a trip around that general area to many locations over a span of a few days or something like that. This is especially true the further away you go, and things like petrol and gas and road tolls and train tickets and entry fees and lift passes and all sorts of hidden fees can really add up over time. Serendipity. Plan for the unplanned. On a road trip, especially on a multi-day one, there are so many wonderful and amazing things that can happen in between the more important parts of a planned trip. And over the years, even though I'm a planner, I've learned to plan specifically for serendipity to happen. Especially when traveling with other photographers who want to stop at every opportunity when you're on the way to a destination, like me. In order to get to your actual destination on time, give yourself a little bit of buffer so that you can get out, you can stretch your legs, and stretch your shutter buttons at the same time. Maximize your time, but not to the point where everything is so rigid. So many of my favorite shots have been from off-the-cuff locations and experiences that I have never planned. Moments just unfold in front of you, and you just so happen to be randomly in the right place at the right time. Be open to that experience and plan a buffer. The next question is really about how to tactically plan your trip. Of course, just going to a single location is kind of straightforward, so this is more for those scenarios where you're going to multiple locations over multiple days. Now, some people are really rigid and structured with their planning. They make plans for every hour on the hour, calculating the exact times that you're able to spend at a given location, transit times to the minute, exact places to go, and exact times to do it in. They see everything that they want to see, and they see only that. Other people can be really loose with their timings. Maybe they have a few places that they want to go to, and they just kind of wing it as the days come up and are generally pretty carefree for the most part. They don't really mind if they miss their timings here and there. They don't really care about the light too much. They just go with the flow and see how it goes. My approach is kind of in the middle. Although when, I first started getting into travel, I was very much a rigid kind of person. But over the years, I've learned that planning serendipity is amazing and that keeping everything running like a freight train is emotionally tiring and doesn't always lead to the most fun time, especially if you're traveling solo. And as such, I tend to plan only the big shoots in the most optimal lighting conditions, and then I wing everything else in between, pretty much. I'll usually plan a shoot for sunrise, and then I'll have a destination to go to for lunch maybe, and then I'll just generally do non-photography related things during the day, and then in the afternoon I will spend the sunset shooting. And those are the three main pillars that I'll have every single day when I'm planning a trip. And that leaves lots of time in between to, do things like getting to the next destination, shooting something else along the way, and just being open to experiences that may pop up that wouldn't be planned at all. Now, of course, the approach is totally up to you. And the only thing that I would add here is that if you're traveling in a group, sometimes some people want every single hour planned out. And, some other people don't like to plan at all. So just make sure that you're on the same page and you'll have a fun time. Using apps like Google Sheets and Excel can really help with sharing the timetable with your entire group if you want to do a timetable. And it really helps to assign at least one person to look after that sheet so that you can have them divvy out the responsibilities to the entire group so that people can then search for places to visit, places to eat, and then work out the general priorities that everyone has. What's your next travel destination? Whether that be within your country or overseas, whether it's a short trip or a long trip, whether you have one currently planned or you don't. Your assignment today is to start planning or continue planning one with the tips that I've provided in this lesson. Again, the assignments in this course lean heavily towards putting into action whatever you've learned for that day, and today is no different. You may have noticed that I'm always trying to encourage you to go out and do things and take your cameras with you. And that's because that's how you learn through experience. So if you don't currently have a road trip or adventure planned, plan one. Contact your friends to see if they'll go with you. And if not, then go on your own. Plan around the idea of taking photos and making memories, and get used to the logistics of planning a successful photography trip, because there's a lot of little things to plan. If you've already got an upcoming trip planned, then great, continue to plan that, or at the very least, get good at your Google Foo and jump into Google Earth and start envisioning the compositions that you want to take at the locations that you've already discovered. And remember, these locations and these trips don't have to be insane places really, really far away or anything like that. They could be as mundane as, just going to the other side of your city or rediscovering your hometown. Whatever they are, just try to make sure that they're novel and then get excited about it. Alrighty, have fun with that one. I'll see you tomorrow.